following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. How you doing, George?
Hey, I'm just fine.
We have a full panel of folk to talk to you and the audience today. We have David Hubler is here. David,
hello.
How are you?
Hello. I'm good.
Al Blumkin is here.
Hello, everybody. Hello there, everybody.
All right. And Ronnie Rabinovitz is here.
How you doing?
Good. I'm here, Ralph Tyko, with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And George is going to introduce the guest who's joining us on the panel on this Veterans Day, George Case III.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ralph. Yeah, I'm so happy to have Dan Schlossberg on the show with us. Dan is a very accomplished baseball author, was so kind to send me a book that he wrote quite a few years ago called The 300 Club. And Dan has written a book recently about Al Clark, American League umpire. We've had Al on the podcast a couple times. It's all about Al's life in Major League Baseball and some of the things that happened to him. And Dan has a lot of interesting stories. And, you know, this is supposed to be a hot stove discussion, and we're going to be talking about baseball during the off season, and that's what the hot stove is all about. So, Dan, welcome to the show, and I'd like to have you talk a little bit about your background, you know, in an author of baseball books, and a little bit about your life.
Good morning, George. Happy Veterans Day to you and to all the guys, and thank you for your service, those of you that are veterans. And my life as a baseball writer, it began in 1969. I graduated from Syracuse University, Newhouse School up there, and went to work for the Associated Press right away in New Jersey and started writing baseball stuff. My first book came out in 1974, and I've averaged about a book a year every year since then. I've done 38 baseball books.
Wow, that's great.
He's being modest. He also writes for Sports Collectors Digest, and every year he comes out with the top, 50 baseball books of the year?
Yeah, that's right. I just finished the column that's going to be coming out in December in that issue.
Yeah, I always look forward to it.
You know what, in talking to Dan, you know, he had mentioned about when I first read about the books that he had written, it was 35, so now it's 38. So, you know, Dan, you're so prolific, and you know, you're a wonderful writer, and your content of the books is great. And I was just curious, how does Al Clark's book seem to be doing? You know, Al and I are good friends. Both Al and my dad were from Trenton, New Jersey, so I've known Al for a long time, and I was really happy that you and Al hooked up together on his book.
The book is doing very well. In fact, it just came out in paperback this year for the first time. But I had such a good time working with him. And all the stories, I mean, I laughed half the time I was interviewing Al. I mean, just great stuff. I mean, for example, he told me he got thrown out of a game during the national anthem. And I said, what are you talking about? So what happened was Frank Robinson was a manager. Al had a rule. The rule was if you have an argument one day, the next day you start fresh and the argument is finished. Well, Frank Robinson came out with the lineup card, and Al was in the gathering of umpires, and Frank started to argue the preceding day's argument. So he got into it with Al, and Al threw him out during the national anthem. I said, Al, what happened? What happened? And he said, well, the league fined us both, reprimanded us both. I said, what would you do if they had to do it again? He said, I wait till the damn song ended.
He's a great guy.
No, that's a terrific story. I know, and Ronnie, I know that you know Al as well. So you
very well. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the kind of guy he is, and he had so many stories that he told us over the years. So you know, it's great, Dan. And you know, what's your latest book now? What's the last book you've worked on?
Well, the last book I did was called The New Baseball Bible, which is an offshoot of the baseball catalog that I did way back in 1980. This is a totally updated version, came out last year, and it's really one-stop shopping for a baseball book. 424 pages, it's under $20. So
yeah, I have an autographed copy from last year's convention, Sabre convention.
That's right. Yeah, that was fun in New York.
Yeah. Dan, I want to ask you one.
Pittsburgh, but
Yeah, Dan, I want to ask you one question. Did you do a revision of the 300 game winners to include Randy Johnson?
It's in the book. Randy Johnson did make the book because he got it in 2009. He was the last 300 game winner.
Yeah, he will be the last 300 game winner in my lifetime.
Most likely. In fact, if you look at the Bill James Handbook 2019, it has the odds of anybody winning 300. The best odds go to Max Scherzer, and that's only 38%.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, you know what's interesting for me, as an old baseball guy who really is a traditionalist, and I was so happy you had both, Lefty Grove and Early Wynn, who my dad played against both of those guys, and Early and my dad were very good friends. But the fact is that you quote, Bob Feller at the end of your book, and he's talking about baseball and the fact that he didn't get 300 wins because of his years, I think 3 or 4 years in the service, but that he was talking about, the lack of fundamentals and, hopes that they get rid of pitch counts and all this kind of nonsense that goes on in baseball today. And to me, he was speaking to the choir because that's the way I feel. And I just wondered.
Don Sutton said the same thing, very much so. He said, we were trained to finish what we started. But I got to tell you the Bob Feller quote, because I asked him point blank, do you regret not winning 300 games? His comment was, well, I didn't win 300 games, but we won the war, and that was probably more important.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That really sounds like Feller because that's the kind of guy he was. I mean, he was a real patriot, and he faced combat. He was an anti-aircraft gunner on the USS Alabama. I mean, he was a terrific guy. I think he was a chief petty officer in the Navy.
Yeah, he never regretted his service. He never regretted.
Yeah, he always, went and made a point of talking about. And today we're having this on Veterans Day. I was with Bob a couple different times at various Veterans Day events, and he always made mention of the sacrifice, and he always said, the real heroes of World War II never came home.
Yeah, Bob Feller won 8 battle stars, by the way. We should mention that. And we should also mention Warren Spahn, who was the only ball player who got a battlefield commission during World War II. So got to mention him. And if you look at his record, too, he probably would have won 400 games if not for military service.
Right. Yeah, you're mentioning that with Spahn. I think you're absolutely correct about that, Dan, because, Spahn, I think, did win a battlefield commission. I think he was a combat engineer in Europe. And, of course, a great pitcher. I think he won, 340-some games?
363.
363.
I had 382.
Okay.
Yeah, 382 complete games.
Yeah, I mean, the complete game records, if you look at those guys, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, today, a guy gets a complete game and it's something that's unique. I mean, back then, as you mentioned, Dan, starting pitchers, they were expected to start and finish games.
Right.
Yeah, very much so. And an oddity about Spahn, he had 363 wins. He also had 363 base hits, including a National League record 35 home runs. That's an NL record for a pitcher.
He was a good hitter for a pitcher. He said he did that because it kept him in games.
That's right.
Well, with the DH in the American League, you never see that. But over the years, there were some excellent hitting pitchers, and you mentioned Spahn. I mean, he was one of them. Walter Johnson, Don Newcomb. I mean, Red Ruffing, Wes Farrell. I mean, there were some guys who were really good with a bat. I mean, today, you got some guys in the National League because you don't have that crazy DH rule. But in the American League, I mean, the guy, he gets up to the plate for maybe the first time in 2 months or whatever it is. He doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, in the interleague games. And the American League ballparks.
That's right.
National League ballparks, they get up,
Right. We've got to mention Tony Cloninger, with 2 grand slams in a game. He was the first player in National League history to do that, and he was a pitcher.
Yeah. And that was April of 1966, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, July.
Was it July? Okay.
It was July. July 3rd, 1966.
I was stationed at Travis Air Force Base and was in San Francisco that day. And in those days, you walk around the city everybody had a transistor radio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like cell phones now.
Sure, it wasn't.
That's right.
Pardon me?
That's right.
Yeah, and I spent a day in San Francisco and listened to that game, as it were, from transistor radio to transistor radio on the street, and that was a big day. It was against the Giants, and 2 grand slams in one day. That pitcher, that's something else.
Yeah,
he also had an RBI single. He had 9 RBIs that day.
Wow.
Now I mentioned a couple of Yankees. Yogi Berra was on on a boat that led troops on D-Day.
That's right.
And Hank Bauer was in the Pacific, and he wound up getting 11 battle stars and 1 Bronze Star, two Bronze Stars and a Silver Star. And when the Yankees went abroad to Japan after 1955, there was with some diplomat that the State Department set up, and diplomat asked the Yankees, anybody been to Asia? Bauer raised his hand and started reciting all the islands, and the guy left.
We got to mention Ted Williams and Jerry Coleman.
Yeah.
They were the only 2 players who served in World War II and the Korean War.
No, you're missing one, Bob Kennedy. The outfielder.
Oh, that's right, Bob Kennedy. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, because I used to throw that trivia question at people, and I even had David Emmett going crazy on that one.
Well, that's
how many homers would Ted Williams have hit, if not losing all those years?
Yeah, well, the thing about Ted Williams, and you guys know, and Dan, but, Ted was a flight instructor, I think, in the Marine Corps in World War II, but he actually faced combat in Korea and almost lost his life. He got hit by ground fire or got hit by some kind of a ordnance, and it almost downed him. And I think it was John Glenn and maybe some other pilots that got him to crash land his plane. It was a jet, and Ted was able to get out of it. But I mean, that was the thing about Veterans Day. I mean, a lot of players were playing baseball, and a lot of guys were facing combat. A couple American League players lost their lives in World War II. So, I mean, we honor our veterans today, and I think it's wonderful. But, the contributions and sacrifices that were made by millions, and as a country today, I don't think we understand because, it's a far-off war and the stuff that we've been doing. But, when it came to World War II, I mean, it was right here on the home front. The guys who didn't serve. I know my dad was 4F, but they had to work in a defense industry plant during the off season. My dad was working in Trenton, New Jersey, building Avenger torpedo bombers. So, I mean, that was part of the life of our country, back in the World War II era.
There's been a lot of books written on the subject. It's really interesting. There was a pitcher named Monty Stratton. I'm sure, Al, you remember him.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
He got injured in the war. I think he had one leg, was it?
Monty Stratton shot his leg off in a hunting accident, and he tried to pitch the next season. But one pitcher who did pitch, and he was Bert Shepard, and Bert was actually
that's right. That's the guy.
Fought. Yeah, Bert fought.
He got shot down.
Had his leg amputated by German doctors. Came back, and as David
actually it was by a Canadian doctor in the
Lou Brissy had a leg that wasn't very good that got shot up tremendous.
Right.
I
had the opportunity, Alan. I had the opportunity to meet Lou Brissy a few years ago at a Veterans Day event down in Washington, and he walked with a limp, but was able to, he was all shot up, and he had all kinds of shrapnel in his legs. But his daughter, I think it was, wrote a book called "The Corporal Was a Pitcher."
Yeah, I have that.
And it was all about Lou Brissy and his World War II experiences, and the fact that he was so determined to come back and pitch in the major leagues, and he was quite effective.
There's a book I just finished that I mentioned called The Victory Season. When he's talking about ball players specifically on the Cardinals and Red Sox. He goes into their war experiences, and some of them were pretty harrowing. One of the things that caught was Murray Dixon almost became a driver for Patton.
Wow. Well, we got to mention
there's a lot of stuff in there I never knew. I never knew a lot of stuff in there about these players' war experiences. But a lot of them were not.
Yeah, let's talk about Christy Mathewson because he was gassed during World War I. And today is actually the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, the war of all wars. And Christy Mathewson was never the same after he came back.
Well, you're right about
Alexander. Yeah.
You know, Dan, he was not right. And as a matter of fact, he died, I think he was in his 40s at Saranac Lake, New York.
Right.
In a TB hospital. Because he was forced to give up. He had become president of the Boston Braves, and his health had declined so much he had to give that up. And it was directly a result of that gas accident in World War I. You're absolutely right. And it's interesting because that gas unit, I don't know if we all know it, but it was commanded by Branch Rickey. And Ty Cobb, I've seen a picture of Cobb and Mathewson. Cobb and Mathewson were in the same unit.
Yeah, Alexander had a very bad experience in World War I. He came back with epilepsy, and he came back with loss of hearing in one ear.
Right. Well, it is amazing what the players went through. I mean, you know, obviously it didn't have to be a baseball player to go through the horribleness of the war, but in both World War I and World War II, Eddie Grant was a former major leaguer. He was killed in World War I. As a matter of fact, his plaque for many years was at the Polo Grounds, and you know, there was so many players during my dad's era, good friends. I mean, Cecil Travis, he had probably a potential Hall of Fame career, had his feet frozen, battled the bulge, and you know, tried to come back, never got his timing, and retired a couple years later. Buddy Lewis flew a lot of combat missions over the hump in Burma. And, you know, Buddy came back. My dad said, you know, his experience, if we're talking about harrowing experiences, his experience turned his hair white. He left as a young man and came back an old guy from all the horrors that he faced during World War II.
You know, Lawrence Brown was once asked if he was ever afraid in a baseball game. He said, after what I went through in the war, a baseball game, you know, was like candy.
Nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did an interview.
You know, getting back to Al Clark for a second, I asked Al if he was ever nervous having 50,000 people screaming at him. He said, that was not when I was the most nervous. I said, so when was the time when you were most nervous? He said, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my rabbi taught me how to blow the shofar, and I had to blow it on the high holidays in front of my parents, my cousins, my brothers. Then I was really nervous.
He's so funny.
Al's got a great sense of humor. I mean, he's got some wonderful stories. And, you know, Dan, I'm so happy that you and Al were able to get together on that book. It's wonderful.
And El McGideon was one who died, too, in the war. Don't forget. It was with Washington.
Dan, while we have you, you are a veteran, and you have some experiences in what we're doing right now from back then. You were in a Robin Williams type situation. Would you tell us
Very
about
much.
That?
Well, remember the movie Good Morning Vietnam? Robin Williams played Adrian Cronauer, who was a real-life character who was on a radio station run by the military in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Well, my unit, the 340th Public Information Detachment, never went overseas, at least not during the time I was there. But we did stay stateside, and we ran radio stations in Fort Carson and Fort Dix. And one of my experiences was spending the day with Jack Benny with a tape recorder. And I was a huge fan of Jack Benny. And I got to spend the whole day with him. He told wonderful stories. I'll tell you one of those stories because it was so funny. He said that during the days of vaudeville, you would perform for a week, you finish Friday night, the next act would start Saturday night. So George Burns, his best friend, was following him at a Minneapolis hotel. So Jack was asleep in his room Saturday morning. The phone rings, and Jack picks up and says, hello, and a voice says, Jack, it's me, George. Can I come up and see you? And Jack said, certainly. Now, Jack was on the 8th floor, so he's thinking, he's got a couple of minutes. What can he do to make George laugh when he comes in? So he takes off his pajamas. He takes a rose from a bouquet somebody sent him. He takes a glass of water. He unlocks the door, and he stands naked on the bed waiting for George. There's a knock on the door. Jack says, who is it? And George says, it's me, George. And Jack says, come in. But George, thinking something was up, sent the maid in.
That is wonderful.
Funny.
And
that's so funny.
Everything comes back to baseball. In the
Yes.
sixth game of the 1973 World Series, the only game I ever attended, only World Series game I've ever been to, it was in Oakland, California, and Jack Benny throws out the first pitch of that game. Charlie Finley had him in. I don't know what his connect was with baseball.
Yeah, they were friends. Finley and Benny were friends. He threw out the first pitch in other games, too.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know that. But,
they're both from Illinois. Well, actually, Finley was from Indiana, LaPorte, Indiana, which is near Chicago. And Jack Benny was from Waukegan, Illinois. So that's
Waukegan, Illinois, yeah.
Dan, are you still in touch with the Atlanta Braves, like Maddox and Smoltz and Glavine?
Oh, yeah. It's been amazing to have 6 Braves get in the Hall of Fame in 5 years, and I think more are coming. I mean, look at Andrew Jones and McGriff and Sheffield and maybe even Leo Mazzoni. Right. You got more guys coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, I told some people that Smoltz was going to be a first ballot because of the uniqueness of his career.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, of all of those guys, he got the lowest voting percentage. Smoltz did.
Huh.
But Eckersley never went back to starting. Smoltz was able to, pitch in relief for a few years and then go back to starting, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very rare, and he was very successive at it, too.
Yeah.
Whatever he did well. And he also missed a year because of Tommy John.
Reynolds, who would relieve and
start.
Yeah.
But somebody put up that Maddox had very, very few 3-2 counts. Somebody put that up on one of the sites on Facebook.
Oh, it's true because he was so efficient with his pitches.
Yeah.
I mean, he pitched a complete game once with 69 pitches. That's amazing.
Oh, my God.
How can you pitch a complete game with 69 pitches? Even a perfect game isn't that few.
Yeah, that's hard to believe, that number. Wow.
Hey, Ronnie Rabinovitz, would you talk a little bit about Jackie Robinson in the military?
Well, yeah, Jackie was in the military, and he had an experience where he was on a military bus, and the bus driver said, "Get to the back," and he said, "No, I don't have to, because I'm serving for our country, and this is a military bus." So the MPs came, and they arrested him, and he was court-martialed, and he was found not guilty. So that was a big step for him. Because
there was a movie about that. There's a movie called The Court Martial of Jackie Robinson. It was very good.
Right, very good. Exactly, I've seen it.
It shows you,
Ronnie, when did that happen? Was that before Jackie had gotten into the major leagues, or was this after?
Yes,
I mean, I'm just
no. It was in the early 40s, I think.
Okay.
43, 44, because he got in 47.
Right.
So it was before his major league career.
Okay. We're talking about the 40s. You got to mention Mo Berg. Mo Berg served in the OSS, which is a forerunner of the CIA. He was a ball player for 15 years, and Babe Ruth said he can speak 16 languages, but he can't hit in any of them. There are a couple of books that have been written about Mo Berg. He was very instrumental in sabotaging the Nazi heavy water experiments. I mean, he was just a great patriot for the United States.
Yeah, he was. When they went over, he was there in 1930. It is 1934, an all-star team. He went and he was taking pictures of various installations.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
he did.
Doolittle allegedly used those pictures when he bombed Tokyo.
Yeah.
There's controversy.
Yeah.
Right, there's controversy about that, but my understanding was that he was very much involved, and like you're saying, Dan, with the OSS, and then later, he had an assignment. He actually, I think, parachuted into Europe, but he had an assignment to check on the progress of Hitler with regard to the atomic bomb.
Yes.
And his assignment was, if he found that the Germans were ahead of the United States, he was to kill he had a gun with him, and was to kill the top German scientist. But as it turned out, he came back, or didn't come back, but he wired his handlers and said, hey, they're nowhere near where we are. And so he didn't have to, accomplish that mission. But Mo was a really interesting guy. Matter of fact, I think it was Casey Stengel said, he might have been the strangest man ever to play baseball. And I know the players.
And the smartest.
My dad knew Moberg, and he always said to me, he said, we didn't understand why Moberg would have been included on that tour of Japan, because he had nowhere near the baseball ability of Ruth and Gehrig and all those guys. But, Moberg was there for, another purpose. And as you said, I mean, he went up, and I think he had a camera hidden under his kimono or something, went up and took all kinds of pictures of Tokyo Harbor, which supposedly, were used or supposed to be used by Doolittle in his raid over Tokyo.
Yeah, 1942, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, when that all-star team left L.A. in 1934, they were going by boat. They were going to stop at Hawaii and a couple other places en route. It was supposed to be a 10-day cruise to Japan. So Babe Ruth said to Moberg, do you speak Japanese? And Moberg said, no, that's not one of my languages. When they get to Japan, they get off the boat, and Mo greets the Japanese greeting team in fluent Japanese. So Babe said, Mo, you lied to me. You told me you didn't speak Japanese. And Mo said, yeah, but that was 10 days ago.
Oh, God. That's funny.
He also carried a cyanide tablet with him when he went over.
Yeah, you're right, David. He did, and I think that was the deal. But Moberg was so fluent. I think it was 16 or 17 languages, and he was really brilliant. I mean, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 days what Babe Ruth been talking about
it sounds about
able
right.
to accomplish at least enough to greet the Japanese, in their own language.
He was a very strange man. He never married. His sister never married. They lived together for a long time, somewhere in New Jersey, and he used to attend a lot of Mets games. He was indeed a very, very unusual man. And I've always suspected that he went on that quote unquote all-star team because he had been placed there by the State Department
Aviva Kempner, who did the Greenberg documentary, is coming out with a documentary on Moberg. She showed in Pittsburgh. She showed us a couple of frames from that. So it should be out sometime in 2019.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
When she does that. I think that's in her name, Aviva Kempner, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. He did the Greenberg documentary. I think about 15 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
She specializes in Jewish baseball
I'm going to have to
players.
cut I got to cut my visit short because I got to go get my free meal at Applebee's for the veterans.
Hey, congratulations on that.
Thank you, Dan. I hope to see you in Baltimore in 2 years. I can't make San Diego.
I hope you got your free taco a couple of weeks ago during the World Series.
Well, if anybody wants to read my writing, check out Forbes.com. I'm one of their national baseball writers now. So if anybody wants to read what I'm doing lately.
We really enjoyed it, Dan. Thanks for being with us.
Dan, thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Ralph. Take care, Al. Nice talking to you. Take care.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Let's keep it going, guys. Anything you guys want to talk about?
Well, I do for a minute, and David, please. I wanted to compliment you. I just read it a few minutes ago. Your comment about about Bill James. So why don't you talk about that? To me, I mean, that was really interesting. I couldn't believe that somebody like Bill James would say what he did.
Yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, I sent it around to everybody who was on the Facebook on the email list that I have, and it was really strange. I got to pull it up here. On the sent where is it? There you go. Bill James he got a bit into hot water. This was in the New York Daily News today. He got into hot water with his Red Sox bosses and the Player Association's Tony Clark. He declared that baseball players, quote, are not the game anymore than the beer vendors are, and that the game will go on with whomever replaces them. Now, I don't understand really what he meant by that. And that was the only quote they used in it, so I sent around for sort of suggestions on that. I mean, if it's not the ball players, we know we've all been critical of some of the things going on in Major League Baseball these days, but I can't imagine a game going on without the players. So I don't know really.
I think the beer is an analogy for the business part of it. And
well, but that's not what I know. What you mean? I agree. I think that there's definitely that analogy because we've all talked about how it's a business before, almost before it's a sport anymore. But I don't know. They're not the game anymore. Then maybe that's what he was referring to. But as far as this quote, it's not 100%.
I think what he's trying to do is saying the analytics have taken over. It doesn't matter how you put out there, the game is going to be played according to formula.
Well, even so, but it's still the players that are
I know, you know that, and we all know that. But,
Yeah.
Well, I just thought it was really curious. I thought it was just a curious quote. Maybe it was taken out of context. I mean, I have no idea, David.
I don't either.
I don't know whether you've seen. Right. I don't know whether you've seen the article. I certainly haven't. But to me, I mean, Bill James is supposed to be the father of sabermetrics. I mean, What's he talking about? Is that what he's talking about? His way of doing things is taken over.
No, he thinks a lot of the analytics. It's completely overdone.
Well, there was an interesting article about where was it? I guess it was in one of the newspapers about one of my least favorite ball clubs, the Red Sox, and how what's his name who led the league in home runs this year, and
J.D. Martinez.
Martinez, thank you.
Yeah.
Martinez isn't one of the three qualifiers for the MVP, and the article was saying, how could it not be? And the result was, well, his stats, according to the Bill James stats, didn't make him qualify, despite the fact that he led the league in home runs and he had so many base hits. The standard old criteria that we all used for the Triple Crown and things like that.
That is a great question. Are sports writers going by the new stat,
Well, he's not even on the list for the top, for the MVP.
That's because he's a DH.
Well, that doesn't mean anything.
Oh, yes, it does.
What
they measure defensive when they create war.
But what
they measure defensive.
The other Red Sox who just retired. No, not Betts. He just retired. My mind is slipping.
Pappy. Big Pappy.
Big Pappy.
Yeah.
Right.
He was always up for consideration.
A DH,
yeah, and he was considered for MVP. So you can make it if you're really that good. It's not so easy to just get up every ninth time and
when they create war, they use defensive also.
Oh, in war, yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. So basically, if you never play the field, or the only time he ever plays the field is in interleague games when they're playing in the National League.
Yeah, but that's my point. That's my point. That he, and that's whoever wrote this article. The point was that he was eliminated because he didn't qualify under these new Bill James rules or formulas. That was the point. Which he
now are the voters using those new rules? Are the voters using those rules as a
I don't know. We'll have to ask Hal.
Sometimes. Well, if they vote Mike Trout the MVP, they're using those rules because as great as Mike Trout is, he's the Ernie Banks of this generation. He's never going to get into a World Series with that team.
Well, if it's just for MVP, that's always been
but I think they're going to give it to Mookie Betts.
I do too.
But they gave a Cy Young Award in the American League a few years ago to King Felix on Seattle. Yeah, we 13-12. And if they give it to DeGrom this year, a pitcher with that kind of a record, unless they're a reliever, just doesn't get the MVP with a record like that.
No,
one less record, even though DeGrom's ERA is microscopic.
He's not going to get the MVP, but
I'm talking about Cy Young. I'm talking about if they vote him as Cy Young, that means they're not counting wins. Don't mean anything anymore. As far as they're concerned.
On some levels, they really shouldn't. His stats are so overwhelming. They're what I call Gretzky-like in terms of ERA, strikeouts to walks, this, that, and the other thing. He was dominant. Wins.
But he lost. He lost again. I realize he had the relief pitchers blow the games for him.
It wasn't just that. The support he got when he pitched was minuscule.
Yeah, if he gave up 2 runs a game, the Mets scored 1.
Right. So, again, all those awards are subjective, and it makes for what we're doing now, Hot Stove League.
Well, the worst of the Golden Gloves and Silver Sluggers. The Golden Gloves, since they gave Palmeiro a Golden Glove when he played 28 games at first base one year and DH the rest of the season, I've lost all, lost all credibility with me.
Good point.
Yeah, Alan, I didn't realize that. I mean, I remember the Golden Glove. I mean, that was something that was really an honor.
When I first started,
Slugger. But, I mean, guys really feel it's their position. I mean, pitchers would
corrupted it.
Say, well, what the hell is a pitcher? But a pitcher has got to go out there, 20, 30 times a season, and so he's a good fielding pitcher. I know Jim Cott
won the most Gold Gloves. I think it was Jim Catt.
Yeah, I think Cott won like 15 or 16, and on the other hand, you had great players like Brooke Robinson and those guys who were, tremendous amount of Gold Gloves. But I mean, that was a real honor. I'm not sure that somebody playing like you're saying, Alan, 20 games or something at first base to get a Gold Glove award. That's crazy.
I know it's crazy.
Alan and David, you guys watched Brooks Robinson. You watched Clete Boyer.
Yep.
An awful lot. Now, was he up there? Was he not up there with Brooks Robinson? Start with you, Al.
Well, as a fielder, yeah. Well, another one I thought was terrific. I saw an awful lot of was Greg Nettles.
That's true too. Yes.
Yeah, and
he was terrific. Terrific.
Brooks Robinson once asked Casey Stengel if he was the best third baseman Casey ever saw. He says, "You're second." He says, "Who's first?" Number 3 in Brooklyn, meaning Billy Cox.
Billy Cox.
He said he was said about Cox once. He peppered this with a few profanities. He said, "That ain't a third baseman. That's an acrobat."
Who said that? Was that
Casey Stengel?
Leo DeRocher?
Casey Stengel said that.
Oh, okay. I think Leo DeRocher compliments Cox at one time or another in the same manner. The guy was great.
Well, over the years, there's been some great, fielding third baseman. I mean, that's a tough position. I don't know if you've ever played it, but I mean, you've got to be like an acrobat. You've got to have a great arm, and you're talking about Robinson and Nettles and those guys.
And George Brett was quite good at third base too.
Yeah, I was at the first 2 games. In Cincinnati in the World Series in 1970 when Brooks Robinson, he just won the MVP for that series for what he did in those 2 games. And then I saw Nettles specifically in the 3rd game in 1978 when Guidry pitched, and Nettles made 3 or 4 stops that just basically, helped them win that game.
Right.
Good point.
No, it's a really tough.
I want you, Al, and David Nemec, this is totally off the subject, to do a show on Cleveland's Stan Cavaleski. Some of his stats. He is the most underrated pitcher. He's a Hall of Famer, not that underrated. But when we look back on the great pitchers, his name doesn't come to mind.
No, I spoke to David on Friday. His wife is going through some. She had surgery on her neck and for thyroid, and she's going through a tough time. He was at the doctor's office when I called him. So I told him, I said, right at the start of the conversation, I'm not calling you up to do a podcast.
Right.
Just so he wouldn't feel obligated. So I'm in fairly frequent contact with him. So once the situation stabilizes, I'll let everybody know.
Okay, that just came to mind because I know you guys are into it. This has been a terrific show.
It has been. Very interesting.
Go around the room. Anybody want to add anything at all? David Hubler.
The only thing I wanted to add is the interesting story about Bert Shepard. We didn't really cover very much about him. And he's sort of the lost man. People always remember some of the other guys who played with one arm, one leg. But his story was really remarkable in that he never gave up hope that he would make it into the major leagues. And in fact, at one point, when Griffith signed him, he was to be a morale booster. He pitched batting practice and he'd make appearances with the team, but he was not being set up to pitch in the major leagues. And of course, it fell to the Assistant Secretary of State to bring attention of him to Griffith because he was so impressed with this guy who was recuperating at Walter Reed Hospital and was so determined to get into the major leagues that's how Griffith signed him on the advice of the Assistant Secretary of State. And he actually did get into a game, and he actually comported himself quite well. He pitched about 5.5 innings. I think it was against the Red Sox. And George, you must. Offhand, I can't. I know he came to bat a couple of times.
He did. He came. David, you really talked extensively about Bert in your book, and the fact is that my dad and Bert were good friends, and Bert did. He was very determined. He had been shot down over Europe during World War II. And had his leg, he was a POW, had his leg amputated, by German doctors or whatever, and came back, and he really did. He was signed by Mr. Griffith to be, batting practice pitcher and make, visits to Walter Reed to encourage the guys and all. But he did. He got into a game. He got into an actual game in relief. Red Sox. Washington was getting beat pretty badly, and Ozzie Bluege was running out of pitchers, and he put Bert in, and Bert pitched. I think, as you said, five and a third innings, something like that. And did very well. The downside. And he did. He took a couple of times up at the plate, but obviously with a wooden leg, you have a problem getting off the mound, and you have a problem running. But, he was able to do that and pitch effectively. And, I have a photograph, and believe it or not, I think it might have been the plane that he was shot down in. Bert, gave my dad an autographed picture of him in the cockpit of his plane saying, "Good luck, George. Hope to see you after the war." And, It was incredible.
And the other thing was he actually was able to field his position pretty well, because the Red Sox tried bunting on him, and after he threw out a couple of them, they stopped bunting on him. I think if they had made a film out of the Bert Shepard story rather than the Monty Stratton story, it would be Bert Shepard who would be the one that more people would remember today.
Well, you know what, David, that's an interesting point. They did the Monty Stratton story because it was a human interest story, and the fact that Monty Stratton, had a wooden leg and he tried to pitch and all that, but it was really a self-inflicted wound. He fell over a fence or something and shot his leg off. Where, Shepard was an actual, combat casualty in World War II. So, I think it'd be a very interesting story.
They've already done it. What that did for the man's...
Well, the best part of the story is that the Yankees tried to sign him out. They flew him to New York. It was just about the beginning of spring training because they were still training here at the University of Maryland. And boy, Griffith was hopping mad. They tried to steal him away. The thought of stealing a one-legged pitcher, and of course, the one thing I did mention earlier, was that it made the black press very, very angry that they were willing to sign a one-legged pitcher but not sign anybody from the Negro leagues.
Right. And you and I, we've talked about that on this podcast too. That you and I are both in agreement. It wasn't Clark Griffith being a racist. It was Clark Griffith being a businessman, and he believed that if he had signed, Gibson and Cool Pop and all that would have affected the attendance dramatically.
Oh, sure.
Of the Homestead Grays, and the Homestead Grays were a tenant of
Yeah, they got a lot of money from the Negro League teams, all the major league teams who let them play. Let the Negro League teams play. All made money from it.
Yeah, but Washington did the best because
I know that. Yeah,
black population here in D.C.
Yep.
And because Washington not only was had a great, it also had great entertainment and things that the players wanted to come into town to take part in.
Yeah, the Monty Stratton story, I think it was 1938 or 1939, and the movie was made, before the war, and Jimmy Stewart starred in it, so it was he was in the public eye long before Bert Shepard or any of the other players who were injured in World War II.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that, Alan. Yep.
It occurs to me that the teams that signed the most blacks early on, like the Dodgers, like the Giants, like the Cleveland Indians, and what have you, had the most success in baseball through the late 40s and even the early 60s.
Yeah, the Braves signed quite a few.
Included.
Yeah, and of course they didn't get anything out of it until they moved to Milwaukee. But they did sign a few when they were in Boston.
My point is that the teams, those teams,
and the National League was way ahead of the American League for years because of that.
No blacks until Elston Howard in the 50s, and they, despite that, had terrific success through the early 60s. So
I'd say,
there's a book I have which is very good. Came out several years ago. It's the integration team by team, and it goes into each of the 16 originals, and they put them in order of their first black player, and it goes very deep into the whole mindset behind each team. And the American League, outside of the Indians and maybe to an extent the White Sox, were all way behind the National League teams, and this affected the National League started winning all the All-Star games, and they started having most of the players that were recognized as the best in the game for years.
Interesting that the White Sox and the Indians were both owned by Bill Veeck.
Yeah, White Sox. The first real one was, even though it was Sam Hairston, the first real one that stuck with them and went through all of it. Was totally unrecognized for what he went through was Minnie Minoso, who I think belongs in the Hall of Fame, and I think it's ridiculous that he's not in.
Absolutely.
And the Hairston that plays with the Pirates, or did a few years ago, was a grandson of.
Yeah, they became the first three generation black family.
Yep.
Very, very
great show, guys. Ronnie Rabinovitz.
Great show. Yes, sir.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, I thought it was a great show. It's great to listen to. I learned a lot. Thank you, guys. It's terrific.
Well, we learned from
Well, thank you, Ronnie. We're glad to have you with us. How you feeling?
Thank you. I'm doing good.
Good. That's good to hear.
I came home yesterday.
Oh, did you? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good.
Happy to
I'm
be
feeling
there,
pretty
I'll
good.
bet.
Yes,
Happy
I
to
am.
be home, I'll bet.
Am. Yeah.
Good.
I sure am.
Recuperating.
Thank you.
We're all day to day. Let's face it.
Yeah.
So stay healthy, gentlemen. We'll do it again next week. How would we say that, Al?
Same bad time, same bad channel.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Music to my ears. Thank you, David. Thank you, George.
Okay.
Thank you, Al. And thank you, Ronnie. Ralph Tyko here, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And
Ralph, can you hang on for a minute, a couple of seconds after this is over? I just wanted to tell you one thing.
My pleasure, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Ralph, I just wanted to let you know that
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.